Up next, we have Davin Crowley-Sweet, Chief Data Officer at Highways England. Davin's presentation will be live today, and he will be discussing information, vision, and strategy. I will let Davin introduce himself and then jump straight into the presentation. So thank you, Davin.
Hi all, my name is Davin Crowley-Sweet. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Highways England. I'm really excited to be here today and hopefully talk about what we're doing in the information space and what we're up to. I've screwed with the agenda today, and I'm going to have to get one of our friends, Lucy, to operate the slides for me. So forgive the bit of a, could you skip to the next slide, that's going to interrupt some of the presentation. So with that to effect, could we skip to the next slide, please, Lucy? Okay, so who is Highways England? We're a public funded, government owned organisation. We plan, design and build and operate England's major A roads and motorways. Pretty sure most of you will have driven on them at some point. And while miles of actual road, that's quite a lot, and it only represents 2% of the roads in England, it actually carries a third of all traffic by mileage and 2/3 of the traffic by heavy freight. So we consider the strategic road network somewhat of the spine of the country, the spine of the transport system. And to that effect, we've been trusted with £27 billion of investment from taxpayers and from government to do something about it. This is kind of a once in a lifetime investment in our roads, similar and on par with what the Victorians did for our generation. We have a very simple purpose in Highways England. We want to connect the country, and that's with people, with friends, that's with jobs and businesses, because we believe that that creates the right society, and we believe that that creates the right economic growth. But as one of my data professionals working for me said, how can we connect the country if we're not connected ourselves? And we need to improve how we're connected, and we firmly believe that it's information that helps connect us. It's the information handed between how we design and build and how we operate and maintain that really creates journeys for people. So I was brought into Highways England to do something about that. How can I use data and information to help connect our business so we can help connect the country? But one of the things I've noticed in my career is data is massively underinvested in. So the rest of the presentation is going to really talk around, well, why do we think it's underinvested in? What do we propose to do about it, and what's our vision and our strategy? So first for me, why is it data so hard? Why is data so underinvested in? I see two major reasons for it. Reason number one is data is not actually seen as an asset. Our economists and our CFOs have run the world for a long time. Sorry guys if you're in the audience. And it's very much driven by the balance sheet, very much driven by the tangible assets. And as such, data is not there, and we often don't see it. Don't treat it, and you can't manage what you can't see. So data is treated like a resource, something to help do something else, rather than an asset in its own right. And some of what I'll present later up disproves that hypothesis that data is merely a resource. The second is that I believe senior leaders lack the language to have a discussion around data. You know, whenever I walk into a room with senior leaders, they don't know the words to use. You know, if they talk about a bridge, they know what an architect's blueprint is, but they wouldn't have a clue what a logical data model is, even though they're very analogous in very many ways. So I think twofold that we see this underinvestment, and it's we're not seeing data as an asset, we're not seeing it as a thing with value, and our senior leaders lack the language. So what about it? We've actually valued our data. So we've taken the approach, it's not on the balance sheet yet, but it may as well be. We valued our data. It's worth £60 billion to UK PLC is what we're forecasting it as. And on top of that, we believe it can generate about £1.2 billion worth of value in how we run our business over the next 10 years. So when you start seeing data at those types of values, it really shifts the focus on how you should invest in it and what you're doing the right way. Interestingly for us, and I suppose interestingly for you, is the number one valued data set to UK PLC was our geospatial data, and particularly our geospatial models. They actually came in at value to UK PLC at £3.2 billion, and that's right, I said billion. So the central focus of our information vision and strategy is around protecting our most valuable data sets. Our geospatial data sets are absolutely right at the top, and it's where we're going to invest in first. So if we could move to the next slide. Thank you. I think this is a really powerful slide for me, and it goes to this point around how the world is changing and why data is so important. So those bar charts on the right hand side represent the market value of the top 500 companies in the S&P. and how that values change over time. So if I went back to 1975, you could account for 83% of the stock market's value by looking at the tangible assets of the companies that made up. Fast forward to 2020, only 13% of the value of the top 500 companies in the S&P is actually made up of the tangible assets on their balance sheet. And that trend is continuing. So what does it say? It tells me that the values of companies in the modern era lie less in the infrastructure that they own and more in the intangible assets they have. And the work we've done, 30% of our intangible assets as a company were actually in the data assets themselves. So organizations are becoming more and more important in terms of the value of their data, not so much the value of their physical assets. And that's true even for the same of organizations that are asset intensive organizations like us. So like I said, on our balance sheet, our road asset is worth £115 billion. 15 billion of it is actually our capitalized technology assets, but our data assets worth 60 billion of intangible value to UK PLC. And if you factor that, if you look at the market research, and I believe these quotes came from PwC, the bottom one at least, 97% of companies don't feel that they manage data very well. So we're in a world where we're underinvesting in data. It's not seen as a balance sheet item, but the value of your organizations is driven by the data, and 97% of us think we don't do a very good job of it. So I think that's a really telling story around where things could go wrong, what companies are going to be the next Blockbuster Videos or the next Kodaks, and why Highways England's not going to be one of them, because we see where our value comes from. Another company that sees where their value comes from is Tesla. And if we could move forward to the next slide, I'll sort of bring that to life a bit. Okay, so most people see Tesla as a car company. We don't. We see them as a spatial data collection company that sells computers on wheels. And that makes a lot of people like, laugh. No, you're talking rubbish. Really interesting point about Tesla is how they're valued and where their value comes from. So I've got some stats. I was checking stock markets this morning. So Tesla has a similar value to Ford, but it sold 93% less cars. And Tesla has half the value of Toyota, but has sold 97% less cars. So you've got a company that's the same value as the big companies, or a similar value to these big car manufacturing companies, but isn't actually selling cars. So what is it that's driving their data? It's the spatial data they collect. That every car is a giant data collection, a mobile data collection engine that is feeding a whole load of neural net models and all sorts of spatial, and Tesla absolutely know it. They know that their value of their company is in the data that you're collecting, that they now own, that they will use to be able to make autonomous vehicles, not actually the car itself, which is just a means to get the data. So while the Fords and Co are trying to put computers in cars, Teslas are making computers on wheels, and they're going to win, in my view, because they recognize where their value comes from and what they're doing about it. And this all goes to the point around how should you be managing a resource, or should you be managing it as an asset in its own right? And if we move to the next slide, some of you may recognize this standard. It's ISO 51. It's an asset management standard. I'm sure for those of you working in the physical infrastructure or built environment, you'll be very familiar with these macro processes. The funny thing about the ISO community is that they didn't recognize data as an asset in its own right and built a chapter in the standard for how to manage data. And my guidance to people is, if you wanted to manage data in an asset management organization, throw away the ISO 55001 chapter on data, but apply the rest of the standard to it. And that's exactly what we're doing as an organization. We are going to be treating our data as an asset in its own right. We're going to be managing it as an asset in its all right. And data management in our organization is a lot more than around agreeing the semantic and tactic layers and talking data dictionaries. It's around setting the organizational culture. It's around setting the language, setting the strategy and the plan. The point for me is treat data as an asset, not as a resource. Treat it as a tangible asset. So for us, if a third of our value is actually our data, is a third of our board's data. If we know our data is worth 4 times as much as our technology, when I look at a business case for investing in data, digital and technology, do those ratios look true? Or do they look like every other business case we've all seen through our career, where it's 5% project management, 95% software and hardware, and data's an afterthought and a risk in the risk matrix to an investment that we make a conscious decision in? And Lucy, if we could go forward a slide, please. Here's our very high level view of our information vision and strategy. So one, it goes on decades. We recognise this is a long-term thing that we have to do. It's not a short-term thing that you just fix overnight. But we've broken it into a very distinct phases. One about, which was the last 5 years, about becoming a tolerable level of risk. So the first thing we did was make sure that we had risks owned by executive committee members, and we had 3 of them. One was around being able to generate value from data, one was around making sure our data was fit for purpose, and one was making sure our information was secure and free from harm. And that elevated the conversation to a board level conversation. Next, where we are now is around opportunity and effectiveness, efficiency and effectiveness, and becoming a more data proficient organisation. So we've got a significant challenge in our RIS period. Our efficiencies are baked into that £27 billion, and it's no small order to be able to drive them out. But we believe over the next 10 years that there's around 800 million to 1.2 billion pounds worth of efficiencies. And the second of us is then moving data into what I call the operational environment, really get into supply management on the strategic net road ourselves, move into naked roads where rather than communicating with drivers via lights on sticks, we're communicating directly in car through connected services. And of course, I'm sure all the brains in this room, bigger than mine, understand how just important geospatial information is going to do there. And the key thing for me is describing the capabilities that are going to get us there. You won't hear me very much talk about master data management or linear referencing or absolute or relative accuracy to the layman's and to the broader business people, because the 4 outcomes that we're telling them that we're going to deliver this is not investments in hardware and software, it's investments in people, process, leadership, culture, talent, etc. And we use the language of specification. Most organizations I've worked with, they say their data is terrible and their data is bad. And then when you ask them, well, what does good data look like? They haven't the foggiest clue. So actually investing some time and effort into really defining what data you need and what good data quality looks like to achieve your goals is step 1 for us. Step 2 is then around fitness for purpose. I don't want to see data used as an excuse to not make decisions. For me, it's about understanding how fit for purpose your data is, and therefore understanding the risk in the decision you use it for, and not getting into decision paralysis because you've never achieved perfect data. We're not going to be hiding behind data quality excuses. Third is making it available. We saw some charts from Luca earlier around UK leading on making their data available. We want to smash that out the park and really make our data available. And one of the big ones we're working on at the moment, which should be available by the end of the year, is a spatial portal, which makes all of our spatial data available through API, and you'd have access directly to it in real time for whatever spatial data you need, because we think there's value or significant value to UK PLC if we can release that data in a way that people understand, that people can come and help us improve, challenge, use to generate their own value in their own market. And that's the last one. Data as an asset is a sunken cost unless you operate it to deliver value. So investing in data science, investing in some of the modern stuff, but avoiding all the buzzwords and really using data to not just make better decisions, but actually challenge the business models themselves. So we're not disruptive and we don't become the next Kodak usurped by companies that we didn't see coming. The next slide, I won't dwell on. These slides hopefully will be issued out and takeaway, is a short video that sort of summarizes what we're trying to do. And that sets out our vision becoming data driven. So we don't need to play it today, but please feel free to get hold of the slides via the event. I'm sure they'll make it available. And if you're a supplier and you're looking to work with us in the future, this is the direction we're going. This is where we want supply chain partners that can help work with us over the long term, not just appear and with the latest hardware and software and disappear once they've installed it. We need business partners to help us generate those 4 outcomes. And to do that, we go on to the second from last slide, which is our information vision and strategy. this is an interactive model that we'll be making available to people as well. And through this model, you can really explore what value we're trying to chase. It talks around the capabilities we're trying to build as an organization and fleshes that out. And it talks around the value that we're chasing, but at a tangible level, i.e. we want a single view of our work bank across 32 spatial systems so that we're able to see and align all of our work when it happens and what's going on. So we know exactly where to work. Looking system by system, appearing at work sites, only find out a week later you've got to go back to the same place because you couldn't see it geospatially. And that then builds on to the last slide. Which is our roadmap. So if you bring all of that together, where we are as a business is that we want to treat our data as an asset. We want to account for it as an asset. We know it's worth 60 billion to UK PLC, and we're determined to protect that and grow that for the value of the UK. But we also recognise it has a major opportunity to help us become a much better, much more efficient organisation at providing journeys to the people and growing us out of some of the economic challenges we have today. To do that, we've identified, and that number's grown, we've actually identified 80 value propositions. So they're distinct problems where we know improved information can help someone make a better decision and drive cost out of the business. We think the sum total of that cost is 800 million to 1.2 billion pounds worth of cashable benefits over a 10-year period. And the socio-economic benefits dwarf that in terms of the things that information can do. If there's 50 projects that can get us there, and then you end up with a net benefit of somewhere in those orders of magnitude below. So that's our strategy in a nutshell, really. And I suppose the thing for me is at a technical level, just how important spatial data is. So not only is our spatial data the most valuable data set that we've got to UK PLC, it's also the most valuable data set for us to achieve our vision and strategy. So for those of you, if you can cast your days back to high school days when you were adding fractions together, and you couldn't add fractions together unless you had a common denominator, that's exactly what spatial data is for us. If I'm trying to mix the world of finance and invoicing in one data set from an SAP type system, and I'm trying to mix our asset databases together so I can get a view of what our unit costs are or cost per mile of service, that's impossible to do unless I have a common denominator between both data sets. But the one thing that's common between those transactions is that a final transaction happens somewhere and an asset is located somewhere. So in order for us to connect the country, we need to be connected ourselves. And our primary data set to connect ourselves, our primary key across all the data sets so we can answer all the big purposes in a very different world, will absolutely be our spatial data. So that's it from me. I hope that's provided a bit of thinking and a bit of challenge around how to think about data, or at least the way Highways England is thinking about data. And hopefully it inspires you guys to find different ways to help us achieve our vision. So thank you very much.
Davin, thank you very much for that. It was a great presentation. You managed to pile through the IT problems as well, so I appreciate that. We've got a host of questions. So, I mean, really, to summarise, what I took out of that, the key thing is not looking at data as a cost, but actually looking at it as an asset as opposed to a resource, and it's a valuable asset. The data is worth 60 billion within Highways England. The highest value data set is geospatial data, which is great. And it sits within what we're hearing from other speakers. It can be that glue for all the other data, which then enables better decisions. I mean, what have we got? Please do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in terms of questions, I mean, Darren, we've got one from James Cutler. What was the methodology used for valuing HE's data assets at 60 billion?
You triangulate it. We use the same methodology that you use on physical assets. So there's something around what's its market value, what's its replacement cost value, what's its income value, and then you find the value somewhere in the middle of that. We also did a huge amount of stakeholder engagement with the likes of, Heathrow, logistics providers, to understand from their view how much of their revenue is generated as a result of having access to our data. So we actually, a big part of the calculation was my customer's customer. So how does the spatial model going to Network Rail create value for Network Rail's customers? Because if they know where the roads intersect with the railway, they can plan their differently. And we approach it from that view. There was a whole load of data science that went behind it, which I won't bore you with on convolutional neural nets. But the main thing is triangulating between revenue, income,
Okay.
and market
And it's
value.
interesting, you're using standard practices that you use for your physical assets, but you're applying those to digital assets. Okay.
Absolutely.
We've got, and sort of following on from that, you talked about the way that at the moment, digital assets aren't portrayed or aren't held within the balance sheets. I mean, do you see a time, or when do you see a time when they'll be listed as intangible assets on Highways England's balance sheet?
Oh God, when the accounting profession catches up to the 19th century would be a good idea. I really don't know, and to be honest, whether they do or don't is irrelevant for me. The fact is, can I affect the culture of my organisation to treat them as if they were? So I think over the next 15, 20 years, we'll start to change. I think there's been some work in Treasury around recognising the value of intangibles, and I think that will naturally lead in further directions. And I think as the UK sort of goes independent in a new world, we'll be looking at where we really generate value, and we'll be forced to think like some of the bigger tech companies who value their intangibles more than their tangible assets. We're very much a knowledge economy already, so it's not a completely foreign thing to us. But I think over the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, okay.
All I know is that once we wake up as a country and decide to do it, I don't want to have to tell people to wait while we work out how. I want to be there ready or waiting.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. Right. So, how does data as an asset sit with the drive to de-siloing in order to power the innovation economy as presented by Luca earlier? So how do you keep an asset whilst also giving it away?
Because I care about the value it creates to UK PLC more than the cost efficiency it creates. Whether I keep hold of my data or release my data doesn't change the efficiency benefit I can get from it. So for us, we want to grow the value of our data to UK PLC. So the more of it we can release, the better. The only concern we'd have around releasing data is the security element of it. How much data could be released without actually making ourselves a target? But with data so readily available, that's becoming a challenge in its own right. So I don't see them as competing initiatives. We've valued our data by looking at how it creates value for our customers. So our thinking is release it as much as you possible. I took a position to our CEO a couple of weeks ago, and we agreed, we were having a bit of the exec team, where what type of business do we want to be? And we use data to help shape it. And we said, are we in the business of journey planning, or are we in the business of information provision? And we realized we're not in the journey planning business, we're in the business of information precision. And just that one decision really shifts the focus of where we need to be. Okay, so what kind of brand do we need to be an information provider? We know where we're going to be, and we know what market we're going to play in. Yeah, okay. No, thank you for that. The next question speaks towards the start of your presentation. So you talked about the difference between the tangible and the intangible, and then you moved on to senior management not being literate or not being IT literate. So, I mean, how hard is it using data or seeing data as an asset, and especially at that exec board level? I've found use the language that's already inherent in the organisation and bend data to it. So rather than talk about data quality and data standards, I'd use the word asset condition and asset performance. If I go to our exec, largely civil engineers, largely from that kind of background, if you talk to them about what's asset condition or what's asset performance, they know exactly what it means. Yeah. If I said to them what's data quality, they would all have a slightly different view and be a bit apprehensive. But is my data fit for purpose, and is it delivering value? We start using that language. So by treating data as an asset and using the rest of ISO 55000 as the language to describe how you manage it, we've put it on the same platform as a bridge, a road, a piece of infrastructure, or a piece of data. So, yes, I want to gradually over the next 10 years increase the literacy of our organisation to have conversations about data. It's important, but in the short term, to make some powerful decisions, find the language of the business, apply it to data. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, again, that makes sense, and it's speaking the language of the business. And you say your business is engineers, and so it's speaking that language, which resonates. I think we've got time for one more question. And this is more of a kind of crystal ball question, but which data do you see growing the most in size over the coming years for Highways England, and how do you see it
how do you see that impacting Highways England?
Okay, right. So if we go back to the point I made around us being an information provision company, one of the reasons we made the decision is that our unique selling point is there are a small number of data sets that only Highways England has access to because we create them or we're first there. We know where work is happening on our road network, you know, so increasing the volume of that, the frequency of that, and the accuracy of that will be an absolute growth area for us. We know the incident clearance times because we're clearing the incidents, so making those debts. So for us, it's around looking at where our USP is and really focusing on those. So, you know, traffic flow, traffic volume, Google can do that from your mobile phone better than we can. So why would we invest a huge amount of effort and time into doing it? Because essentially, if we had done it, our market value's gone to zero because someone else has usurped us. So we're looking at where we've got the market value over data, where we've got the USP over data, and it's those data sets that are going to grow. Absolutely, the spatial attribution of those data sets will be critical because it's no use to anyone if you can't locate it.
Makes sense. And it's back to that comment about it being, you know, location being the glue between all of the other asset information and non-asset information as well. Davin, thank you very much for that. It's a fantastic presentation. We have got a list of other questions out. I mean, if you don't mind, and this goes to the other speakers as well, if you don't mind answering those offline and we can distribute those to the attendees, that would be, if you've got time, that would be fantastic. Thank you. But in the meantime...
And thanks for bearing with me through the internet issues.
Yeah, that's right.